Summer has ended and school season has begun for many, and many Christian parents want books for their kids in all seasons that don't have things like what they call agenda or wokeness. But in our zeal to keep bad, poisonous content out of books, might we miss our children's more important need to enjoy good, nutritious content in our books?
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
Behold a new Fantastical Truth, this Lorehaven podcast that helps you explore fantastical stories for God's glory. I'm Stephen Burnett, the publisher of Lorehaven. I just woke up a couple hours ago, but I'm not woke. I am, however, the author of a sci-fi adventure novel that released earlier this year from Enclave Publishing called Above the Circle of Earth.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and I'm hungry. All this talk about nutrition and good, healthy kinds of things has made me think it's been too long since I've had some Texas brisket. And no thanks, I do not want the lab-grown meat because that's going out of business, and that's fake anyway, as a listener, Caleb, just reminded me in an email. So thank you, Caleb. This is episode 276. How can parents find books that aren't just not woke, but are actually good? Stephen, there's a couple double negatives, maybe a triple negative there. I'm not really sure, but this is going to be a great episode.
It's interesting that the fake meat company had to recently clarify that rumors of their bankruptcy had also been faked. So fake stuff
really?
all around.
So that was
apparently
fake.
So. Apparently,
Wow.
at least that's what they
All kinds
say.
of
But
news.
then again, so much fakery, fake moralities, fake agendas. That's what we're talking about today, with some clarification at the beginning, of course. So we appreciate y'all hanging in there with that title, because we are talking about wokeness here. But if you're one of those people who feels that you've heard that word used too often as a slander, hang tough. We're actually going to challenge some of the folks who make anti-wokeness their sole deciding factor in how they choose books. Zach, I know that you and your wife don't do that. You're not letting bad ideologies, poisons into your house if you can help it. But there are other qualifications that you all use when you're finding books for your kids.
Yeah, and so much of it is just personal. It's just knowing their kind of state of mind and just their age level and their comfort level and just what they personally are disturbed by or what they fear. We don't subscribe to this ideology that's kind of beneath all of this, which is that, books should make people uncomfortable and disrupt and dismantle everything that they hold dear. Like, that's just some weird new spirit of the age, I guess you could say. But I do have a good definition of wokeness. And by the way, this is not really as political a thing as people might think when we talk about this.
It's cultural.
There is a left-wing and a right-wing version of this. And so this is not, we're not getting the political parties here, but it very much is a social movement that takes many forms, like a hydra.
I'd forgotten that we can claim some kind of neutral ground there, because there is a woke left and a woke right. And before you get into any policies, platforms, or presidents, it's all about beliefs. Really, it's a religious movement, and it has infected people who believe all kinds of politics. So broaden your definitions a bit if you've only heard one side or the other accuse someone else of being that away. We're going to define that in just a moment, and then challenge some people who think that if you take the razor blade out of the Halloween candy, well, you can just eat whatever candy you like. No, I think that no razor blades is a great minimum expectation, but don't stop there. Also look for good stuff, and be aware, by the way, that even books that are non-woke may have hazards for your kids. Zach, when I was younger, there was a collection of classic fairy tales on the shelf in my family's living room. And they had these grand old covers. They may have been published probably before World War I, actually. And I unfortunately was fascinated by one of these books, which had, I believe it was a Russian fairy tale. And it was about a soldier who killed a witch and then took her magic dog, and the dog granted wishes. And he had, I remember, eyes as big as dinner plates. And the soldier just went on a complete tear, wishing for all kinds of things that were not good for him. But it wasn't a monkey's paw story. It was basically a bad wish fulfillment story. The soldier was a bad dude. So really kind of an anti-hero there, really nihilistic type story. Well, this story haunted me somehow to the point where I could not sleep and was having kind of these waking nightmares. So whenever someone mentions having this happen, I can think back to that. So books have all kinds of effects on your kids and you yourself have grown up, even if they're not woke. But we try to find the best ones here at lorehaven.com, where we review the best Christian-made fantastical novels we found, like our recent review of Illuminary by Shauna Schroeder. And then upcoming this Friday, J.J. Fisher has a new fantasy called The Heart of the King. We are reviewing that as well. Subscribe free to get updates. You can also join the Lorehaven Guild, our Discord server, where we undertake the best Christian fantastical novels on book quests. So if your kid is 13 or older, and if you are comfortable with a curated, Christian-run, homeschool-friendly, by the way, Discord server, then you are welcome to join us there. Our next book quest starts in early September. We also do sponsorships, like our top sponsor today, Enclave Publishing, with the new Morgan L. Bussey novel, Winter's Chill. This is a fantasy. It's book 2 in the series. Fighter, emissary, long-lost daughter. Brigid has one mission as she returns to the north to warn her people of the oath that binds them. But the mountains are treacherous and snow comes early, leaving her on death's doorstep until she has an unexpected encounter that not only reveals a secret about her past, but also brings new allies into her life. Meanwhile, the healer Caden must come to terms with the awakening of his Eldaron power. With winter approaching and the war on hold, he ventures to the White City to uncover his heritage. As he walks the ancient halls of his people's birthplace, he discovers not all adversaries are across the battle line. He must navigate political opponents while searching for a way to stop those of his kind who have turned to the darkness. Yet even the bitterness of winter cannot keep Brigid and Caden apart. A connection has been forged between them, and their bond might be the one thing that could save the Nordic people and end the war. Enclave Publishing presents Winter's Chill, book 2 in the Nordic Wars series by Inspi Sela and Carol Award-winning author Morgan L. Bussey. This is available now wherever fantastic books are sold. You can ask for Winter's Chill at your favorite bookseller or your local library, or order Winter's Chill online at Amazon or enclavepublishingstore.com. It's also an audiobook from Oasis Audio. All of those notes in the show notes, and that chilly cover for Winter's Chill that hopefully warms us up for that topic of wokeness. What do we mean by that? We've had to clarify that a few times on this podcast before. And Zach, you've gotten us started by noting that this is a bipartisan streak. It's an ideological mess, but it has at least a few particular identifiers. Zach, do you have those on hand?
Yeah, I think I can boil it down into 2 words, which is intersectional favoritism. Okay, so let me unpack that a little bit. Identity group collectivism. So erasing people as individuals and making them avatars of some kind of group, whether it could be any kind of identity-based group. And then favoring one group over another because of victim narratives. Now, see, again, this has nothing to do with some kind of political party. This is really just critical consciousness, if you want to do a deep dive. And we've done a whole episode on that a little bit, more about the postmodern influence on all of this. But just favoritism, favoring one group of people over another because one group is a perceived victim of another group, and then treating all individuals in that group as the same. And so erasing people's individuality and really their imago Dei. It's a very materialistic way to look at people. Paul says, from now on, we no longer view people from a worldly point of view. So this is a very unbiblical way to treat people. This methodology, I've really been seeing it on the right as well as on the left. And it's sort of like the One Ring and the Lord of the Rings, when Boromir is like, we can wield this for good. And I think the way that it often gets advanced to is sort of this Mott and Bailey, this kind of deceptive way of like, saying something controversial and then retreating to something less controversial. There's a lot of examples in culture. And I'm actually going to try to give an example from a story. If you've read Wheel of Time, you know that there's this one group called the Aes Sedai, female channelers of magic. And then there's this other group called the Children of the Light, often called the White Cloaks, that are totally against any kind of magic use because of how it destroyed the world thousands of years ago. And so they will say things like, oh, all the Aes Sedai are witches, and just accuse all of them of being evil. Well, it's true that there are some Aes Sedai that are part of what's called the Black Aja, which is devoted to the Dark One, like the devil of this world. And then there are also some that are very devious and cunning and maybe not truly evil, but kind of chaotic neutral. I don't know. But most of them are pretty good. They're just difficult to deal with because they're very powerful magic users. But the White Cloaks kind of sweep all of them, in the same group of evil people. But then if they're challenged on that, they will retreat to the more safe, less controversial. Well, look at so-and-so who, did such and such, and therefore they're all evil.
It sounds in one respect like this is a very morally complex way to excuse simple bigotry, Zach, in many ways. And yet it also feels very righteous because people will speak in terms of empathy and they'll speak in terms of compassion and they will talk about Christ's call to care for the poor. And then if you swap in the group that you believe is the most spiritual, you can make this viewpoint sound even biblical. And people do this on all sides. At the same time, the term wokeness has also been used basically as a nickname, and unfortunately it's been used often as a nickname for things I don't like. People will just say, oh, that sounds woke. And then that's apparently you just won the argument, supposedly. I don't agree with that misuse of the term, and all that does is add a lot of heat and not a lot of light to the discussion. But also, and this goes specifically even to the cover art for this episode, people will use wokeness and agenda interchangeably. And what they mean is what I call the religion of sexualityism. This idea of partisanship and this special self-righteous bigotry can also be used to excuse particular sins that people claim are rooted in their identity. So if you say, I identify as this type of sinner, what the Bible would call sin, then that means I'm more spiritual, I'm a victim, and I have some sort of special privilege to tell my story, some sort of lived experience that you need to pay attention to, or else you're not woke or you're not empathetic or whatever. And a lot of parents, justifiably so, by the way, do not want this stuff in their kids' books. And this is absolutely their right as parents to keep out these ideologies. Don't hear any attack on them or any disregard of those concerns. Those are valid concerns. What I'm going to argue here in the next chapter is don't stop there. So let's go to chapter 1. Yes, kids need books that repeat truth. And here we must be very clear. In the general market, there are a lot of books that are full of that sexualityist agenda. And this is not a political agenda first. It's a religious agenda. The politicians may want you to think it's only political. Don't listen to them. This is the field of pastors before it is a field of pundits. And many general market books are including stuff in here that kids don't need and that grownups don't need. It's useless. It is worse than useless. It challenges the image of God. It challenges that God-created division between men and women and what we are supposed to do. Yes, there's brokenness in the world. Sin harms a lot of our psychology as well as our spirituality. Sin corrupts everything it touches. But the problem is sin. The problem is not, people don't accept me for who I am. The problem, first off, starts in all the human hearts. And there has indeed been a vast, intentional, sometimes people will even argue, top-down funded effort to get this ideology into content for kids. That is absolutely happening, and it's not good. So I say it's a great starting point to say, I don't want razor blades in my kids' Halloween candy. I don't want this stuff in my books. My strong recommendation is do not stop there. And I will say, Zach, I have seen this before. This is actually really old impulse, like going back to the 80s, if not earlier. Obviously, parents want to protect their kids, but in particular, evangelical parents have been eager for decades to keep what we used to call political correctness. out of books, or atheism or new age movement, or there's a bunch of different concerns, and understandably so. And yet often what would happen before, and a lot of kids were really bothered by this and they grew up struggling to hold on to their faith, is the parents would just say, well, if there's no razor blade in a candy, then you can just have whatever candy you like. Well, then the candy would end up harming the kid, or it would be bad for their health, bad for their imagination growing up. Some parents didn't seem to care whether or not the books repeated other lies. Because sometimes if you are looking for a book that doesn't have a rainbow on the front, now you're looking for a black and white book with a black and white morality, and disregarding that fact that sometimes the world is complicated. And even kids need to get this idea, even young kids need to get this idea in their books. You don't want a book that's going to overcorrect, for example, for cheap grace, and then go full on into some sort of moral legalism. That is at best a half truth, and at worst it is a lie. Or they may be free of one agenda while smuggling in other deceptions. You might go from the fire into the frying pan, or the reverse. Rainbows may be used to hide lies, but sometimes if you cut out all the color, then you get a book that is just as deceptive as one with the agenda.
Your analogy of the razor blade, I think, is spot on, Stephen, because the way I define the razor blade is sort of that political collectivism, that it first starts with, a story where there is a certain behavior that is a favored behavior by some movement. And then that behavior becomes this person's identity. Like, I am this action, I am this mindset. And then they get collectivized into some kind of action group that's trying to push this or normalize this behavior. And again, this could be a lot of things. It could be sexualityism, it could be something to do with race. But I think sometimes there's just a story with a certain behavior that parents find objectionable, and that's fine. But often there's not the other elements to it. There's not that chain that goes after that, where they become that identity, which then becomes collectivized. There might be a character acting in a sinful way, and it's just that. Maybe it's not being championed by the book, but it also may not be showing the consequences of that action. And okay, that's where you as the parent can have a conversation. Was that a good way for that character to behave?
Should the Hogwarts instructors have really awarded all those last minute points to Gryffindor after they broke all the school rules?
Good example. I'll pretend I understand it because I've not read Harry Potter. But yeah, I assume you know what you're talking about and the listeners understand. But I think also you mentioned overcorrection. So I think a lot of parents are very on guard against, same-sex behavior, identity, collectivism in books. And so they find a book that kind of swings the other way, and there's, opposite sex attraction, but then there's also lust and other bad behaviors that come from that. And they think, well, at least it's not the other thing. It's like,
oh, out of the fire into the frying pan.
You got to be on guard against a lot of things, but that doesn't mean you remove your guards on the other side, I guess.
Absolutely. I've largely been pleased by my choice of political podcast bros who have spoken about a certain recent advertising campaign perceived as anti-woke. And they've said, yeah, okay, it's good that we don't have all of this deviant sexual behavior, but also, guys, this is also a deviant sexual behavior. It's trying to normalize lust, and we don't want to go back to that either. This is not healthy for society, and it's not morally good besides. And that may actually specifically apply to this topic, is even before there was, sexualityism infesting kids' books and grown-up books and TV shows and all of that, arguably we had a lot of lustful behaviors being endorsed between men and women. And that led to this, you guys, because either way, it's an emphasis on the individual wants as opposed to God's morality for men and women, one with another, and the sanctity of marriage and all of that. And frankly, if one political faction says, hey, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for you guys because you guys normalize this, this, and this, then you got to concede the point to them, because in either case, the root problem is rebellion against God's standards for male and female identity and marriage and all of that.
I was observing one conversation a little while ago about the Hardy Boys. Great books I grew up with. But there was an interesting thing that happened where one group of parents said, well, hey, it's great. There's very traditional values in this. And then another group was maybe a little oversensitized and said, yeah, but look at how this guy is talking about girls in the book. It seems very objectifying. In my opinion, just reading a little bit more of the text that they were discussing, there wasn't anything inappropriate necessarily. It was just guys that were very interested in spending time with girls and nothing beyond that. Like it seemed very PG. But I think sometimes we can kind of read into stories, because we're used to having to like read between the lines with a lot of things, and we've sort of oversensitized ourselves. There's definitely a problem of people being desensitized, right? There are a lot of books that have just hammered these things into us so much that we think, I guess that's just normal. But sometimes we can kind of go the other way of where we're looking so hard for something inappropriate that we might see it where it's not there.
Absolutely. And I can say from experience as a former kid, parents, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but whatever you're on your guard against, the kid's not interested in that anyway. In many cases, the kid is going to be distracted or even tempted by some other element in the book you had no idea you needed to safeguard against. So, not to spook you about this, but kids are both hardier, pun unintended, than you think, and also more sensitive than you think. And the best solution is to be in that conversation that Zach mentioned. I know not every parent can read every book before their kids do. It would be great if we could, but keep talking with your child at age appropriate levels, because something will sneak through. And if you're in a good relationship with that child and your child knows that he or she can bring that concern to you, then you build a relationship, and even better, you have a discipleship opportunity. And it also means it's a little bit of less of a stressful scenario where you're trying to keep every single objectionable element or agenda out of your books. Sometimes the books will get a lie in there, but you, the parent, hiding in plain sight, now have the opportunity to bring in the truth. Let's go to our second sponsor, author Dan Megill, with his new sci-fi novel, The Waymaker's Foresight. Speaking of trying to anticipate things, Gavin and Nax are smugglers struggling to find work on a backwater space station. So when Lila, a highborn lady, hires them for a short jaunt to the nearest wormhole, they don't ask many questions. But Lila is fleeing the galaxy's mightiest empire, carrying knowledge of lost technologies that could reshape the stars. Now this unlikely trio must learn to work together as they race between star systems and unravel forgotten mysteries, while staying one step ahead of the Imperial fleets and a ruthless prince. The Waymaker's Foresight is a new science fiction adventure by Dan Megill, author of the acclaimed Earthburst trilogy, and The Waymaker's Foresight can be found on Amazon and Audible. Visit Megill.com to learn more, Megill.com. We'll also have those links in that cool sci-fi cover in the show notes for this episode 276. That sounds good. So it's a great segue to chapter 2. But kids also need books that are good. So if you follow the sentence here, yes, kids need books that repeat truth, but kids also need books that are good. If you're looking for something to give your kids that is free of rat poison, great. We don't want to fail to take that seriously, but that's also a very, very low bar to clear. Zach, I will sometimes see, and you will see in parents groups and from friends and such, they're looking for books that are not woke, that don't have agenda. We don't want people smooching or doing anything like that, especially if they're part of this newfangled sexual agenda. Less interested do they seem to be, or at least publicly less so, in books that are well made. I see people asking, does this book have anything in it? Less so do I see people asking, what does this book have in it? What's the nutritional value here? Not just no poison, but active vitamins and good things to help your kids' imagination grow. Do these books have the potential to be timeless, even if they're newer books? Do these books have a quality in their writing, in their marketing, in the author's personal character, in the consistency of what the author does that matches what growing kids want and need? A few examples here, and Zach, I'd love to hear how you all apply these standards as well. Consider, does the book have an honest creator? Like, is the person's name on the book the actual author of the book? Or was it written by committee or generated, perhaps? Does the book and its actual story show a real hero, but also with some realistic flaws that are also appropriate for the age level of the reading audience. I don't want a book, going back to chapter 1, I don't want a book where the heroes are always, always, always the good guys and the villains are always, always the bad guys. At least for older kids, you need to see the hero struggle and you need to see the villain land at least one solid point before the villain goes down. Good guys still need to be good guys and bad guys bad, especially for younger kids. And going back to the rainbow example, sometimes folks who are presenting that rainbow image, they'll get somebody with a flag on the picture book cover or something. Sometimes they are drawn incorrectly. They can be drawn rather sloppily, you know. I've noticed, for example, that the sexual agenda rainbow only has 6 colors. I believe that was intentional. I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up again. I read a fascinating thing about it fairly recently, but the actual rainbow has 7 colors. So look for accurately portrayed rainbows and stories. I've seen people that get upset because there's a book cover with a unicorn and a rainbow, and you know the book may be from 1973, and that's not when the rainbow was being appropriated for certain religious agendas.
Yeah, that's kind of that oversensitization that I was
a little bit
talking
of an
about, yeah.
oversensitivity there. Yeah. Next, you'll be bothered that God sent his rainbow in the clouds at the grand finale of Genesis 9. God has made good light. So look for good reflections of light in books, especially from creators who are faithful to their craft, and even better if they're faithful to their craft and faithful to Jesus Christ.
Yeah, something we look for is that a book is well written, and an easy way you can tell is if you keep having to put it down because you're just not enjoying reading it, or whether or not you enjoy a reread of that book, especially if you're reading it aloud or you're listening to the audiobook and you're hearing it for the second, third, or fourth time, which is often the case with kids' books. They want to hear it again. They want to read it again. They want you to read it again. So if you're not enjoying that book on especially the 10th reading, you know, or even just the second, it's probably not that well written. And I think it's hard to be honest about that when it's someone coming from your team. You know, it's hard to be honest and have that critical eye if it's someone that you would otherwise agree with on a lot of values. But that's a big one because especially this generation, Gen Z and now Gen Alpha. So these are kids that are as old as 13 now as we record this. Well, they're not as online, I guess, as Gen Z, but they are seeing so many more advertisements. They're getting marketed to constantly. We put on like a 6 or 8 minute YouTube video the other day, and there were 6 to 8 ads that I counted.
Wow, like
and
once
I'm like,
a minute.
Just let me watch the dang video, like without an ad every minute, literally. And my kids use YouTube for these like Minecraft kids exercise videos that are just hilarious, where they're supposed to kind of like run and jump, you know, in place while they watch this thing. And yeah, it's just, and most of the ads are fine. It's the point is because they're exposed to so much marketing, they are very sensitive to authenticity. If you are trying to pretend that a book is good, that's just really not well made, yeah, I don't think you're going to fool them.
One aspect of my wife's background that I really appreciate is that her parents would do their best. Now, her parents were readers, and not every parent is a reader. Pro tip, if you want your kid to read, you're going to have to be a reader. So make time for audiobooks at least. Zach, sometimes I'll go to homeschool conferences and parents, bless them, you know, I know they're really busy and all that, but they're looking for books for their kids. And I just thank the Lord that the kids have developed the habit of reading, because the parents will say, yeah, I don't read, but my kid's really into reading. And I go, wow, you're really missing out. It'd be great to be able to read together if at all possible, even if you have to go for audiobooks. And if you're not good at reading, get good. I don't know what to tell you. But when my wife was growing up, her parents would read a lot of the books. And then the time came where I believe it goes, she brought a book home from the library. And I think it was her dad at the time who said, well, why don't you read it and then let us know what you think? And that was a pretty risky maneuver. And mind you, this was way before the American Library Association and a bunch of publishers went woke and sexuality agenda. So it's a little bit different. Anyway, she read the book. She already had, by that point, a lot of discernment trained into her, at least the early stages of it. She was an older kid, so it's not like she was 5 years old or something. Maybe more, 10 or 12. I'd have to ask her to confirm these details. But she figured out, I didn't like this. I didn't like how the characters behaved. Something rang poorly about the morality of that story. But she couldn't have got to that point without what some people might call sheltering. See, I don't disagree with sheltering. I'm grateful for a lot of my sheltering growing up. The only qualifier there is that it needs to be temporary. You've got to have a plan for not just keeping your kid within the confines of your home, but sending them out into the world to be fruitful and multiply. Literally, this goes back to the first commandment that God gave people in a world without sin, yes, but a lot of that still qualifies now. We're supposed to go out and engage the world on our own, but training to understand those basic discernment principles and the principles of where to find a good story, not just a story that has some bad stuff in it. Oh, Zach, I just set up the next sponsorship, which is my own sponsorship because I'm kind of stealing from my own book here, at least the portions that I wrote, although I agree with all of it. It's The Pop Culture Parent, where I'm the co-author along with Ted Turneau and Dr. Jared Moore. Now, this book's a few years old. I'd like to talk about my sci-fi, Above the Circle of Earth, which is about, characters who are engaging this world of the future. But for the world of today, I kind of woke up recently and realized, whoa, this book is still really relevant. In fact, more so now than it was before, because what we do is we go through this idea of popular culture and we ask those big questions that some of the Christians who do the discernment resources don't ask. Guys, what is this even for? Why do we have games and stories and songs and all of this? What is the point of them? Are they just a distraction? Are they meant to teach morality or just be just entertainment? Well, we answer those questions with scripture, not just feelings. And then we go through case studies for kids of different age levels. So I'm a big fan, like I said, of starting off with that more of that protective side, almost the sheltering side for younger kids, but then getting those discussions started. We provide 5 basic questions that people can work into those conversations with their kids when they're young and when they're older and asking those questions, or when they're teenagers or young adults, in which case you may be able to formalize the process a little bit more, but hopefully by then it's intuitional for your kids. That's The Pop Culture Parent. It's nonfiction about fiction, subtitle, Helping Kids Engage Their World for Christ. It's not just about witnessing to people. It's not just about finding the good stuff for your own satisfaction. It is about the glory of God and the advancement of Christ's kingdom in us and for our neighbors. Pop Culture Parent. And by the way, Amazon, I just saw recently, they have the Kindle version on super sale right now. It's like $3 right now. I'm just looking at it now. So hopefully that's still active by the time you listen to this episode. More notes in the show notes. In chapter 3, this is the kind of lower priority for a lot of very busy parents. It's the fact that kids also need books that celebrate beauty. So there we've gotten their classical virtues in once again: truth, goodness, and beauty. Good books have truth and goodness for sure, but great ones also honor the beauty of God and the wonders of his creation and the cool stuff that humans do, even when it's not super spiritual. And if the term beauty seems too highfalutin or maybe feminine, not so, fellows. Just hear that word as a healthy love for God and his creation. This is about emotions. This is about those feelings when you see a sunset, or I was looking up in the sky the other day and seeing Jupiter and Venus together in the morning. And I was just thinking, wow. And because I have like enough classical education to be dangerous, I understand that it's, Jove meets the feminine, these mythological connections. And it's just super cool to see things like that. And great books are going to capture all of that human experience, even for young kids, with those sufferings and joys that are part of life. And I think that a well-balanced reading diet, even for little kids, will prepare them for a lifetime of literature that will embrace all of those good things. These great books will also show the wonders of God's world. You'll have a character go to the national park and look at an eagle soar, or even admiring a high-rise building and generating that feeling of awe. And of course, a book that's well written will be beautiful in its style and not just what it's talking about. Even better, I think the best stories, even some from non-Christians, will, whether or not they know it, hearken to a lost paradise or a future paradise. They won't be so cynical or politically driven or agenda laden that they fail to take time to honor this idea of this wonderful restored world. Like, Zach, even as a grown up, like Star Trek harkens to this a little bit because there's this techno optimism idea. Now the problem is it's saturated in humanism, and some of these episodes it has some of this deviant pre-sexualityism, male female sexual bad stuff. So you got to be discerning, but at least there is an earnestness there, and I do appreciate that. And for little kids, I think in books that's going to look a little different, but I'd love to see more of these in Christian made books as well. And I go back to the idea of the rainbow. I believe there is a rainbow over God's throne in at least one vision of heaven. And it's another reminder that God has made this reflection of light, the spectrum of light, for his glory. And it is a darn shame that a lot of people now take that symbol and use it to advocate stuff that is in hatred of God ultimately. But that doesn't make the rainbow ugly. It is still beautiful. You can use a rainbow in your picture book illustrations, folks. Like Christians should take it back. That never really was lost anyway. It's a part of the natural world that God has made for his glory and for beauty. And even in Exodus, God is telling the first craftsman for the tabernacle, you shall make these garments for glory and for beauty. God likes beauty. Beauty glorifies him. We glorify him by honoring beauty.
You know, a lot of what we've been talking about is the command from Proverbs 22:28, do not move an ancient boundary stone set up by your ancestors.
Ooh. Mm-hmm.
You know, if there's any agenda from a lot of modern publishing, it's exactly that. It's people trying to move those ancient boundary stones and saying, well, actually, you don't need that. That's what, primitive people thought we needed to have boundaries about. We can reimagine the text and reinterpret it in all these ways that just so happen to affirm everything I want to do in my life. And it's like, oh, how convenient. But there's another side to this too, which is that we need to honor our ancestors in terms of the books that they read, the classic books, the great books, as it were, which is a real collection you can buy, I think, on Amazon or Great Books website, whatever it is. It's a lot of books that come from the Christian tradition that are hundreds or thousands of years old, and even some that are from the pre-Christian era, such as Homer's The Odyssey. We talked last week about Epic the Musical, which is a thing my kids and their friends have totally gotten me hooked on, because it's this just amazing musical version of the Odyssey. And they would even say, look, it's not accurate in a lot of ways. It's definitely taking creative license with it. But the interesting thing is I was talking to my daughter's friend who's 15 or 16, and he said he's read the Odyssey 3 times now. I think because of that musical, or maybe kind of in alongside of it. And I thought, what high school kid says that nowadays? Like, that's just really cool. It's also neat to think that that story was originally a poem. And so I guess you'd have to understand Greek to be able to read it, but it was orally delivered for so long. And it is not a short story. It's a very long poem that people used to memorize and say out loud. That's a real devotion to the craft, right? We have to sort of honor that. And nowadays we can get these books instantly and digitally and audibly and whatever. It sometimes takes that time to really invest, because most of these older books are harder to read. Naomi and I were talking about this recently with one set of books that we wanted our kids to try, and we're like, well, these would be fine content-wise, but just the reading level is really high. And we're like, well, maybe we won't do that right now. But I've kind of been rethinking that. We were talking about George MacDonald's books, and those were only written, 150 years ago. Excellent books, but definitely written with a different style of English. And obviously a very Christian worldview, only like PG content, I would say, but much harder to read linguistically. Well, it's just going to take more effort, for us to engage these beautiful books. They endure because of their beauty. You don't have something endure because it's trying so hard to be relevant and quippy and snarky and hip and use all the lingo. Like, that is just going to disappear like so fast. But something that's produced with a real love for the English language and for the story itself, not just trying to go the other way and just force in a Christian agenda, but like have a truly beautiful setting and characters and plot. that is going to be a book that lasts.
Very good points. I just realized that the truth, beauty, and goodness starts not in the books or our expectations for them, formal or otherwise, but it starts with what I mentioned earlier, the culture of reading that optimally is going to be so saturated in your family, in your circle of friends or whatever, that you wouldn't even say, oh, culture of reading. It's just a thing that we do. And that in itself is true and good and beautiful because Christians have always historically been people of books. We like writing. We trace our ideological ancestry all the way back to Hebrews writing on parchment with reeds and very hard to do that back then. And then it's Gutenberg developing the printing press in order to print a Bible. And all of this is part of our heritage. And so it's not just living up to our heritage, but it's because God has given his word to us as a book, first and foremost. Before it was an audiobook, before it was memory verses on a little cute wall art, it was a book, the book. And so to honor books one way or another goes back to honoring God's word. And obviously that's the first book that we ought to be reading together and commenting on. And it's not perfectly safe, but it is good. And it is the defining source for truth, beauty, and goodness because God is the source of these. And he is the prime author of the Bible. And so when parents are reading books, starting with the Bible, but also other books aloud to their kids, they are saying through their actions, this is good. This is true. This is beautiful. Young kids and even some older kids and even some grownups don't really understand that, but they can feel it. They may not be taught it, but they can catch it. And I realized that may be why I caught it when I was younger. My mom used to read us Little House in the Prairie books and some of these other books. No, not The Hobbit. All of our cool guests, they can say, my dad read me The Hobbit when I was 8 years old. And now we didn't get to The Hobbit, but it was enough. I learned by example what truth, beauty, and goodness were even that early. And so now I think it's great to communicate that specifically. Don't just look for lies, evil, and ugliness. Look in your books for your kids and yourself for truth, beauty, and goodness.
Yeah. And I would say too that it doesn't all have to be the happy emotions, right? It could be stories where there's sadness, where there's fear or dread or loss. And again, you have to know your kid and you have to know yourself. There's some books that just aren't going to be good at certain times and stages of life. But, we ultimately want to follow characters who are courageous and maybe even a little disagreeable. They're not doing everything by committee. Sometimes they're taking risks and they're going ahead of people without really sure of where they're going. And they're facing monsters. Like, we don't necessarily want stories where there's no monsters at all. We want stories where monsters are defeated. And that can mean some scary moments. That can mean some terrifying journeys for the character. But life is full of those trials too. And we need to know that we can overcome the darkness.
Those sound like extremely based books, and some people sling around that term. It's more of a nickname for stuff I like, but I like the idea of that term if you preface it with biblical. Guys, look for biblically based books. I see some cheesy Christian-made books out there somewhere, even for kids, but largely I'm going to be more sympathetic toward a book, especially a fantastical book, a fantasy or sci-fi or supernatural and such, that comes from a Christian storyteller, because the odds are that Christian storyteller is going to be in alignment with your worldview. So I sometimes wonder, there may be good books at the library. I agree, but don't stop there. Start with a book by a spiritual family member. And that's one reason why Lorehaven does what we do. There are other books and other genres and from non-Christian creators, but we at Lorehaven, we try to find the best Christian-made fantastical novels. And you can actually go to the library and search by age and see what we list and what we review and recommend. And that may be a great way to start, especially if your kids are interested in fantasy and science fiction.
Well, to you, our listener, we want to know, what truthful, good, and beautiful books did you enjoy growing up? What are you enjoying reading to your kids if you're a parent? And what do you recommend? So send us a note to podcast@lorehaven.com or find us on Facebook, X, and Instagram.
Next on Fantastical Truth, so many books, so little time. Zach, I have right now in my Brand X megastore shopping cart new bookshelves. As soon as I can, I'm going to get some more because I'm running out of room. Now, part of that is because I have collectibles also with the books, and I may have to rethink my arrangement there. But you may be having the same problem, catching so many books, collecting so many of them that you're running out of space. Is book collection with physical media a waste of time, space, and money? Or is this something you need to prioritize as a Christian and as a reader? That's the topic of our next episode. We hope you enjoyed this episode. A little bit of controversy, but rightfully so. I don't think we can afford to play neutral in this one, folks. There are folks out there, guys, there really are folks who are after your kids, okay? Not to scaremonger here, but it's true. But guess who's also after your kids? Jesus Christ, the righteous, the source of goodness, truth, and beauty. And if he wants your kids, none can snatch them from his hand. I take confidence in that, and yet he also gives us the choice of finding great stories to help train our kids and to help train them to seek and find fantastical truth.